information that is needed to get to make New Zealand taxpayers paying their fair dues. So we support this bill and recommend it to the House, Mr. Speaker.
Yes. Call Raymond Ho.
Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to abolish gift duty and, among other things, amend the Tax Administration Act 1994 to improve the ability of IRD to disclose information in the course of good tax administrative practice. There are two main reasons why Labour opposes this bill. Politics is all about priorities, but under national, hardworking Kiwi families have been struggling to keep up with the increasing cost of living, and as the cold of winter bites, power bills aren't the only things up with food price increasing.
Order. This is a second reading speech. Like last night was a third reading speech. We must just confine ourselves to what is in the bill, so other things are irrelevant and shouldn't be discussed. All right? Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason why I cited these figures is because I want to show and demonstrate the National Act government got the priority wrong. But anyway, the second reason is more of a technical nature. It is wrong to use a bill that is supposedly for administration and remedial matters to push through the abolition of tax. Such legislation should be reserved for technical changes and would usually be controversial. Therefore, apart from the provisions relating to gift duty, Labour supports the content of this bill and in the normal course of events would vote for it. However, due to these concerns, we have to vote against the entire bill. The Law Society and a number of other submitters raised a further concern that the abolition of gift duty would create problems for the enforcement of claims under the Property Relationship Act 1977 and the Family Protection Act 1955. Poorly thought out legislation will simply require further amendments in the future. It is a waste of this Parliament's time and it will create huge legal uncertainties. Further, the abolition of gift duty may just create another avenue for tax evasion. The submission from the New Zealand Institute of Chartered Accountants noted a number of tax avoidance opportunities that may arise in the absence of gift duty. Even the IRD officials in the regulatory impact statement caution that tax avoidance could increase in the absence of the duty. No wonder New Zealand Trustee Services called for any changes to gift duty to be delayed until after the Law Commission's review of trust law is completed. The Law Commission has embarked on an in-depth review of trust law in New Zealand. The first issues paper was released in November 2010, and this year the Law Commission will release its fourth and final part on trust law. As Labour's spokesperson for Law Commission, I find a bit odd that the government has ignored the fact that the review of our trust law is underway and still it decided to go ahead to abolish the gift duty that has existed for 125 years. I noted the reason for the decision is that the revenue from gift duty is around $1 million a year, but costs IRD about $500,000 to administrate it. The compliance costs on the private sector, on the other hand, amounted to $70 million each year. The fact that people currently spend $70 million every year on gift duty compliance to achieve something is no reason per se for removing it. I acknowledge the original purpose was to protect the estate duty base by discouraging the gifting of assets prior to death and raise revenue, and has applied in some form since 1885. But I'm not convinced that the gift duty should be removed on the basis that the original rationale was no longer relevant. More importantly, gift duty actually exists to prevent tax avoidance and the so-called structuring. Scrapping gift duty actually opens the way to tax avoidance and structuring. Estate duties were abolished in 1992, but gift duties remained in place to prevent people from hiding assets in order to defeating creditors, avoid tax liabilities, obtain access to government benefits such as rest home subsidies, for example. This was one of the major concerns in reviewing whether the gift duty should be abolished at all. But Minister Peter Dam, in his speech earlier, assured us that there are adequate measures in place to prevent such manipulations and protect creditors. And the government will monitor the effect on the economy and tax system to ensure there are no unintended effects or unexpected arising oversights. So I invited the Minister to advise us more in details of those, and I quote, adequate measures, end quote, at some later stage of the development of this bill. Naturally, once the gift duty is abolished, new assets can be transferred to a trust without the need for a gifting program, and existing debts can be forgiven in full. According to George Tanner QC, who is in charge of the Law Commission's inquiry into trust law, that I wish bring to the attention of this House that New Zealanders must have a solid reason why they're so passionate about establishing trusts. Because in New Zealand, there are one trust for every 18 people. In Australia, it's one for every 34 people. In Canada, it's one for every 148. And in the United Kingdom, 294. So the abolition of gift duty will have a far-reaching consequences. Well, the bill as introduced by Minister Peter Dam is very simple, but the change will have ramifications in other areas of law, as I covered earlier, for instance, relationship of property, creditor protection, and insolvency. The Law Commission has proposed that existing Trustee Act, which was passed in 1956, be reviewed and modernized. One of the outcomes is likely to be stricter compliance requirements for trusts. So here again, stricter compliance requirements. So will the stricter compliance requirements for trusts be warranted for the government to reject those recommendations? We will see. We also learned that government agencies, according to the minister who introduced this bill, such as WIMS and Inland Revenue, could potentially establish new rules and procedures for how gifts to family trusts are treated. This could mean a trust settlor may not be able to simply gift the assets in one transaction and then expect wider benefits to accrue as a matter of course. Again, I invited the minister to advise us of those possible measures, especially how gifting to family trusts are to be treated. As I said, given the Law Commission's review of a trust is in progress, will the government implement the Law Commission's recommendations, especially those recommendations are contrary to what the government has already done? Some legal experts have already argued that if the government abolishes gift duty, then it must amend the law to allow the courts to order a division of these capitals, of trust capital, to achieve a fair and equitable settlement. So my question again to the Minister is that if your government going to amend relevant law to achieve that purpose, I have outlined what George Tanner QC cited as why New Zealand is so passionate about establishing trusts. Well, it's all about trusts. Well, indeed, this general election this November is about trusts. Thank you.